Hello and welcome to Health Tech Builders. Here we explore the business of health innovation through real stories from leaders in the trenches, the wins, the failures, and everything in between. You will get insights and practical advice to help you build and lead in health tech. I am your host, Rodrigo Hute. Hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today, my guest is Ryan Koonce. Ryan is the CEO and founder of GrowthBench. GrowthBench helps companies with fractional leadership and growth services. And Ryan, he's also the founder of Mammoth Growth, a data consulting firm. Ryan, thank you so much for being here today and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Rodrigo. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, as background, I met Ryan at one of the YPO events. He gave an impressive talk, and I knew that I wanted to get to know him. He's the real deal. He's the expert, and I think that we are here for a treat, and we're gonna learn a lot today. So today we're gonna talk about data and data analytics. In particular, I am interested in learning how to unlock the power of data to fuel growth, to fuel revenue growth. So if you are a small, medium business in tech, in software, or you're a digital company, this episode is for you. And so we will learn how to build and scale a practical, budget-conscious analytics foundation to reach 100 plus in revenue. That's the goal here today. And before we get started, I just want to set the scene and to provide context. I think that this is my opinion, but I believe that we are drowning in data today. You know, as CEOs, presidents running businesses, I think that we are drowning in data, and yet we are starving for wisdom and insights. You know, there is too much data, there is data overload, there is too many systems, there are data quality issues, there is AI hype, we have limited budgets, blah, 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 right? So, you know, I wanted to invite Ryan today to help us truly understand and unpack what's really important for CEOs. So, Ryan, you know, we're gonna play a little bit of role play today, but I want to start by asking you, if you were the CEO of a $20 or $30 million revenue business, let's say a B2B SaaS company today, with a limited budget, like most companies, and no data team, what would you do to set up a strong data analytics foundation? Where would you begin?
Yeah, thanks, Rodrigo. I mean, I think that the situation you just presented is pretty common. I'll say that 6 months ago, I would have said, go get a data team. And we'll talk about today why you don't need a data team anymore. The key to getting your data right, and you mentioned this sort of idea of drowning in data. The reality is there's a bunch of data, but the data ultimately is often in silos. So I have Salesforce data, and I have maybe some Stripe data, and maybe I have some, Google data, and it's everywhere. It's finance data and marketing data and product data and sales data. And so the problem is none of that data is normalized, and more importantly, companies aren't even talking about data the right way. So if you take it up a level, one of the things that we do with businesses is we have, at the beginning of an engagement, all the executives write down the definitions of things like revenue and LTV and customer and conversion, which is a trick question. And what ends up happening is you have this list of random definitions. And so, the CFO might be saying revenue and the marketing person might be saying revenue, but they're actually saying different things. And that seems crazy because how can revenue be different? But it is because, you have the way the CFO is thinking about it, where they're thinking about chargebacks or credits or other things. Whereas the marketing person is just like all the revenue, right? And as businesses get more complex, that gets more complex. And the point is to illustrate that data isn't just about the number; it's about the canonical definition of the number and the thing that you're trying to measure. and it's the starting point for where companies fail. And so just that data governance conversation, the idea that we want to get to accurate, reliable, consistent, accessible data isn't as straightforward as maybe most companies think.
What happens? So I absolutely agree with you. I mean, it starts with a clear definition of what KPIs and metrics actually mean. I've worked at companies where retention was the North Star metric. And if you would ask the CEO, the CFO, the product managers, the marketing managers, everybody would give you a completely different definition. So I agree with that. How do you get alignment with that? How do you get
Yeah, it's
aligned?
good. Well, most people want to be aligned. They just haven't had anybody take responsibility for it. And it comes from the CEO. At the end of the day, if the CEO isn't data driven, the company won't be data driven. And so I think, there are a lot of CEOs that are now data driven. There are still CEOs that are like, yeah, this is kind of how we're going to do it. And it's right. And I know it's right. And so I think it starts with the CEO. I think it starts with just somebody owning that process for data governance. It's often actually landing with the CFO now. So what is revenue? What is a conversion? What are these numbers? What do they mean? Who's going to manage any updates that we make to them and those definitions? And that's a good starting point. And so as long as there's an owner for something in a business, you can have success. And somebody in the business needs to take responsibility for what is going to be measured and how it's going to be defined.
Right. What happens if you define a metric today or a KPI today, and in a year, the CEO or the CFO decides, oh, actually retention is not A, B, and C. It's this other definition. But you already set up your systems in a specific way.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a huge problem?
Well, it's not. I think you have to call it something other than retention. Retention too, because you're going to have the historical data, or you recalculate your historical data. And I think again, it goes back to that idea of you have a data foundation and you have these things, and so there is a way to get all the data into a place. Today, the place is the warehouse. How you do that has a methodology, and so changing the canonical definition is fine as long as it's normalized across your reports, or just pick a different name. It's the new retention, right? And so we know we have the old retention. Now we have the new retention. Everybody's on the same page.
Okay, makes sense. So let's move on and talk a little bit about what are the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves. And let's go back to this example as that you are a CEO of this B2B company. Right. Let's talk about data sources. Let's talk about infrastructure. Like, what are the data sources that matter most? If you're a $20, $30 million revenue company, I'm sure that you have data, finance data, sales data, marketing data, product data, blah, blah, blah. How do you think about data sources?
Definitely. Well, a couple things that are really important. One is, we're at the point now where you do have to start thinking about a data warehouse. And it doesn't have to be a huge line item on your budget. And so, the warehouse should be Databricks or Snowflake or BigQuery. Anything else like Redshift or whatever, you're just creating work for yourself. And you may have a data guy that says, "Oh, we have to use this other thing," and then you should probably decide if that person is required as a central point of the company, right? Because we get into these situations now where there's 1,000 tools. And people get hired and they love the thing that they worked on at the last company or some other company they worked on, which might not be the right thing for your company. And so I think that part of the data collection conversation is really important. It's almost impossible for a company to evaluate and buy their own tools today. There's too many. You're probably going to be set up for failure. And if you do it wrong, it's going to set you back a year. So in marketing, first thing is, if you have Google Analytics and you're using it to run your business, you're flying blind. It never works. So just assume the data is wrong in Google Analytics. So the marketing team, if they're using that, that's the first place to start, right? It's like, okay, you're using Google Analytics. You can't report to the board using Google Analytics. We have to find something better. And so there are opportunities for that. Certainly an attribution. So how do I measure my media spend and understand my acquisition cost and my lifetime value for my CRM? and bind all those things together. That's what the marketing team needs to do, number one. And then when we think about data and tools, we're also thinking about outreach, and we're thinking about touching customers. And so we're going to need a way to measure those things. Today, across the organization on the front end, oftentimes that starts with the CDP. We could have an entire hour conversation on what a CDP means, but setting that aside, each of these teams has to have something that you can get the data into the warehouse. So if it's marketing, you need to get the data into the warehouse. If it's Salesforce or HubSpot, you need to be able to get the data into the warehouse, and then fundamentally bind all those data around those definitions we talked about.
Okay, so if I let me recap. So the first layer is that data warehouse. Like you need to have the data warehouse so that you can connect the data from the different platforms, whether it's your finance platform, your CRM, your ERP, Google Analytics, blah blah blah, and you connect all of those different data sources into your data warehouse, right? And then the second thing that you said was, in the case of marketing, Google Analytics does a decent job at gathering all the traffic data, campaign level data.
Nope, but never works. That's always wrong. Just like I will put a flag in the ground and say all Google Analytics data compared to auditable event data or session data, it will never match. You can't audit Google Analytics. You can audit everything else, and Google Analytics is wrong.
Okay,
so I'll die on my sword.
Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper on the marketing space. So what would you do if you were the CEO or the chief marketing officer? Let's focus on that piece for a second. So you have your data warehouse. Everybody uses Google Analytics, maybe other apps like attribution app or other for attribution. What would your tech stack be if you were running marketing?
Yeah, so we're talking about B2B, and honestly, I'm seeing a lot of companies move to HubSpot for both their marketing and their sales measurement and their operations. I don't think that's necessarily a bad move. I think it actually matters if you're PLG or SLG or a combination of both, right? These are things that actually make a difference in your decision-making process. Or I already have Salesforce and we're going to keep it and we need to use it. And so I think one of the things that we're always conscious of is we're probably not going to be able to rip out what you have, except Google Analytics, because we can prove there's other ways to do those things. But then it's about making the thing that you have work better. And so in the top of the funnel, attribution is always an issue, as you mentioned, super biased to attribution app. But there's also not just what is my acquisition cost, but what did the user do on my site and in my funnel? And in particular, in a PLG motion, you're going to see something like an amplitude or a mix panel, for example. There are a couple options for that. As long as it identifies users and track events, it's probably okay. You're going to want to bind that to an identity-based or an account-based way to send email, which is not Eloqua or Pardot or Salesforce Marketing Cloud, probably, right? And we see things like, customer.io or Braze or Iterable, particularly on the PLG side. On the SLG side, we have a little bit more flexibility. We see a lot more companies moving towards, HubSpot. And then it's collecting that data and getting it, again, into a place where you can normalize it so that you can see that the marketing team did something and it resulted in either an opportunity moved into a stage in Salesforce or ultimately into closed one, or somebody filled out the form and the credit card got hit in Stripe. And I think companies often struggle, to tie those things together.
Okay. Let me go back to the infrastructure piece for a second. Obviously, it depends on the company. You talked about if you're a PLG company or you're a B2B company or you're a direct-to-consumer company, your data analytics stack could vary or will vary. What's the minimum viable data stack that you would focus on? And let me tell you why. Because I've heard many people, and I don't know if this is wrong or not, but for example, you touched on CDPs, customer data platforms. So everybody has been talking about CDPs for a while, but then a lot of companies, I've heard a lot of business owners and CEOs say, "Oh, we are not ready for a CDP. We are too small. This is too complex."
Mm.
So if you're hired to run a 20-30 million dollar business, what's kind of step one? Because it can be so overwhelming to really understand and learn about all of these different tools and data integration and infrastructure and warehouses, and where do you begin?
Well, first of all, if you've gotten to 20 or 30 million dollars without doing any of this stuff, congratulations. Kudos to you, because that's winning despite yourself, right? I think you have to start thinking about a CDP, and you have to start thinking about a warehouse at that size. And when we work most closely with Segment, we think it's the best CDP, but there are other options. And I think that when people think about them being complex, I think it's just because they're trying to evaluate a CDP in a vacuum, and listening to the sales teams from those CDP companies tell them all the things, which can be overwhelming and confusing. But it does provide you a way to bind a lot of things together and access the warehouse in a cost effective way. So I'll stop there, because I think that's an important component to this. 20 or $30 million, you need to start getting real. That incremental growth and those gains that you're going to get to 100 million, you're going to have to do it proactively, and you're going to have to be on top of that information. And so, most of the companies we see at that size are already thinking about this and moving down that path.
Okay, so you have some revenue, 10, 20, 30 million. You have your data warehouse. You have your function specific platforms, whether it's HubSpot or CRMs, whatever. Then you add your customer data platform. So you already have your definitions. You already have your warehouse layer. You have your platform layer. So you are moving in the right direction. So let's talk about another potential issue, which is data quality,
Mm.
and integration. Like, I've worked at companies and I've heard a lot of CEOs say, "Yes, we have a lot of data. I don't know if I can trust my data." You mentioned
Uh-huh.
Google. You mentioned Google Analytics. I mean, I don't trust Google Analytics. I don't trust Meta's conversion data. Who can I trust? Should I trust the platforms? Should I trust a third party vendor? Do I need to have like a great data science team in house to be able to make sense of all of this? So talk a little bit about that: data quality, integration.
Yeah, look, so we've done over 1,000 engagements, and every single one of them started off with me asking, do you have the data you need and believe the data you have? And the answer is always no. And so the question really is, where do we start? Because probably it's all a mess. Uh, and I think it really comes back to, where's the ultimate level of pain? Because like you said, the marketing team always has pain. The product team has pain, the finance team has pain, the sales team has pain. And so the way we think about it is, first of all, what are the business questions we're trying to answer that will drive growth in the business? And what is growth? Because that's also very nebulous. I need to generate more revenue from more customers more often at a lower cost. That's all business is. And then how do I prioritize those questions so that the work that we're doing is going to get us yield the most quickly? Because here's the thing, I can have all the data in the world, and I can have all the data that's right and accurate. But if I'm not looking at the data that's most important, it doesn't matter. And so what companies tend to do, and executives tend to do, when they don't have the data they need or believe the data they have, they start asking the data team or the people that have access to data crazy questions, because they're just looking for anything to think about to drive their business on. And so now the data team, who isn't thinking about the business strategically, starts getting all these requests, and this backlog continues to build. And now they have all these questions that they need to answer, and they don't have any idea which ones are important. And the reality is the executives don't either at this point. It's just, I'm not getting the answers to these questions I keep asking the data team for, and I'm super frustrated. And you end up in this vicious cycle. And so the first thing to do is to think about, what are the questions I need answered that will actually help me run my business better, and prioritize them across not the silos in the business, but the entire business. So now I can say, well, marketing team, I know that you want to know this thing, but if we can increase price by 10% without affecting demand, and we can do a test around that and we can measure it, that's the greatest money ever. It's free, right? And so I think the starting point of this is just really being very ruthlessly pragmatic about what questions you want to answer. And then once you say, okay, well, I have these things I want to answer. What are the business questions? Then I can say, well, what are the metrics to get to the answers? And those are those canonical definitions we talked about. Then it's very easy to say, what are the tools to get to the metrics? Do I have them? Can I even measure these things? Then it becomes yes or no. And then it's, oh, well, how do we implement the tool? Or how do we buy the tool in order to implement it? And then finally, and the most important part, is how do we benchmark, test, and optimize? And so that simple process, if applied in any part of the company, will literally change the way that you can leverage the data to grow your business.
Makes total sense. How do you then? So I guess that the way that you connect the data across functions, I not functions, but I would say probably the way to frame the question is on from a customer perspective. If we are trying to drive growth, and we already talked about price and volume, and we're trying to probably it's a combination of you need to connect sales data and platforms and marketing data and platform and product and those kind of things. Then I think that in order to be able to have a complete view of the customer and those tools, the CDP would be the answer. Is that accurate?
That's right. I think, if very specifically, the best stack that we would, employ if we had complete greenfield, which never happens because everybody already bought something, we would implement attribution app for attribution, which ties into segment data, which becomes the data layer. If we have a PLG motion, we would use Amplitude to understand those customer behavioral cohorts and do testing within the app. We would connect it to the CRM, probably through the data warehouse, which we would usually use Snowflake. And we would use a medallion modeling methodology with DBT, which is at getdbt.com, which provides us with a gold model that the rest of the company can access easily. Build our dashboards on top of that. Doesn't matter what it is. Sigma, Looker, Tableau, Hex, the opportunity to do medallion modeling has made the actual BI reporting layer less relevant. And so, you can pull all these things together and you can tell a story now where I understand not only the users that are engaging with our business, but also how the accounts and the companies of those customers are engaging with our business, to benchmark the data, to optimize the data, and to go through a testing framework. And I do think the benchmarking piece is really important because people often have an intuition about it's working or not working, but they don't really understand what the benchmark is. And if you can do that as a starting point, then you can really think about where to focus and how to tune those dials.
I have a different perspective about benchmarks, and
okay.
I think that in my experience, so for example, let's talk about retention as a metric. Like a lot of companies are obsessed about retention, and they are right. It's a key, especially if you're in recurring revenue businesses. Retention, it's absolutely important. But then you see a lot of these, experts posting, sharing blogs and benchmark studies that say, oh, in B2B, the benchmark for enterprise B2B companies should be 90 plus, or if it's net dollar retention, it should be over 110%, whatever. But then my pushback comes back to how you started this. We started this conversation, which is definitions, and I found that I may be reaching 100% retention, but my definition of retention could be very different to yours. So I'm not sure that my perspective is more.
I agree.
It's more around benchmarks are interesting to see. It's a guide, but I think that it's more important to see your trends and your evolution rather than comparing to other companies.
And I agree with you 100%. And that's actually why definitions matter, because what I'm saying for benchmark is different than what you're saying for benchmark. So what I'm saying for benchmark is your benchmark, your company's retention rate, your company's conversion rate, and not only company's conversion rate, what is the conversion rate for a cohort from a particular channel so that I know what I need to beat. I'm not going to beat some other company. There's just too many other variables, right?
I
Like I
see.
can't
I
do
see.
that. Yeah. And so I need internally to say to my team, listen, our landing page conversion rate from a certain campaign is 37%. I need it to be 42, right?
I see. I see.
And by the way, the more granular I can get with these internal benchmarks, the better I can tune the dials, and we can multiply those optimizations together to drive outsized growth.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're referring to internal benchmarks. Yeah. Now I
Always
get it.
internal benchmarks. External benchmarks are useless, totally irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're talking about the same thing. All right.
100%.
Cool. So I was gonna ask you about reporting tools, but I think that
Mhm.
you already answered my question. Like, you know, after you have Looker, you have Tableau, you have whatever it is, at the end of the day, after you connect everything and you're trying to answer specific business questions, or you want to report specific KPIs or metrics, everything rolls up into beautiful dashboards that executive teams and board members look at on a daily basis. If I understood you correctly, you're saying that those are less relevant nowadays because there are many different options, or they are easier way to produce those. Is that accurate, or did I misunderstood?
I think there was a time where people had concerns about, do I buy Looker or Sigma or Tableau or Metabase or whatever, and it was a way to create those dashboards. We've kind of reached an inflection point where the data itself is actually the most important thing. And by the way, if you're not collecting accurate, reliable, consistent data, AI is eating everything. I'm seeing demos every week of things that I didn't think were possible a year ago. Well, they weren't possible a year ago. It's crazy, right? And so the only way it works though is if the data is clean. And so, what happens today is those dashboarding tools that actually generate the reports, the features and functionality that exist aren't as interesting because we can create a model for the data, which is a way of structuring the data so that it's much more accessible, that any of those tools can access more easily. It's like the visualization component is less interesting. The idea that I get the raw data into a data lake and then I create these medallion models that make it accessible to the organization and make it accessible to the AI, that's really important. Because quite frankly, in 18 months, most of these interfaces go away. I don't need to generate a report and see a graph, when I can just go in and ask the AI to just answer my question. Like,
Mm.
create a list of all the users that are the best at doing the thing, and da 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 da. Boom, done. Right? We're not that far away. So like splunking around in a report to find insight is a waste of time. I just want just tell me what to do. Right? Find me the thing that's the insight and generate a plan, and then I hand it off to an IC and they go do it. And so I think we're actually at an inflection point where that data collection component, leveraging a CDP to get everything normalized and get it into the warehouse and bind all of those things together, like the time is now. Because in a year, you're going to be like way behind. And if your competitors are doing it, they're actually going to leapfrog you because they're going to have cost efficiencies and they're going to have more information than you do.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Thank you. Then, so it's clear about the customer data platform. It's a must. My understanding. It's a must. Let me ask you another. Let me go back to your point around marketing analytics for a second.
Mhm.
And you mentioned Google Analytics. Everybody that every marketer, it doesn't matter if you're a direct to consumer or B2B marketer, there's always this question about attribution and how do you assign credit. And clearly marketing data, not access, but today is probably 50% of the traffic it's tracked. We don't have perfect perfect tracking anymore for many different reasons that we all know about. And then the attribution question, it's becoming even harder. And now it seems that we are going back to, we are attribution models are becoming even more relevant, but you have less visibility and less tracking. People are talking about marketing mix models, MMMs, the marketing mix models,
Mm-hmm.
which seems to be more complex regression models. And it's more of a snapshot in a given point in time. It's not kind of real time in a way. And then the final thing, it's also the incrementality question, right? Like, how do you know if your marketing, it's really contributed 100% of the new revenue versus, there is too much momentum coming from the previous year or whatever. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, what is the current state of marketing analytics and how are you thinking about that? How would you approach it if you were a CEO?
Well, I do approach it every day, and I'll tell you, you opened up a can of worms, which is good. I think, when you think about attribution, we think about it in three buckets, like you said. You have your MMM, which is probabilistic, and you have your MTA, which is multi-touch attribution, which is usually deterministic. The most important components to attribution are that you have to be able to attribute cost to a conversion, which most platforms won't do. You have to be able to audit all the data, which most platforms can't do. And you have to be able to customize the model to make it work for your business. So for multi-touch attribution, it actually can work extremely well. It's just that most marketers have never seen it. Okay, so that's the first part. And as a result, the gut reaction is the same reaction that I mentioned before, where you have executives grabbing random questions out of thin air because they don't have the data they need or believe the data they have. They jump to MMM. Okay. And so MMM is a probabilistic solution, but it's only as good as the data that you put in. And so the best case scenario is having really tight deterministic multi-touch attribution data and using that data with an MMM provider that will provide you the p-scores of their model, which most won't, right? And the p-score is going to tell you basically whether the model is actually really accurate or if they just flipped a coin and gave you a result. Okay. And so I think it's really important to know that. And because there's other two components. One is MMM is going to tell you directionally where your business is and how to contribute those contribution margins, but it can't really tell you what to do next. Whereas in MTA, you can literally see that you spent twice as much on a campaign as you thought you did to get a user in the door. And so I think that those two components are really relevant. And in the end, the more you spend, the more you need both. If you're only spending 10 grand a month on ads, don't bother. Just do a holdout test. Okay, I didn't spend, everything went away, or nothing changed. Okay, I guess I don't need to spend on that, right? And so there's approaches that you can use to make sure that things are working or not working. And it does come back to a marketer having an opinion about how to, measure their business. And I think a lot of marketers, particularly ones, again, going back and bagging on GA, which are thinking about, bounce rates and, Sankey diagrams and things that like might not actually give them actionable insight. They have to go back to thinking about what are the really important questions we need to answer. How do we think about the fact that I might have spent twice as much to acquire this user than I thought, which by the way, might be okay. Oh, and by the way, I still need to measure in a subscription business all the revenue in a cohort that goes back to that cost of acquisition, right? And so again, it's not simplistic. And I think that's something that you have to take away from this, which is like, it's not going to just magically do your job for you. If you're a marketer, you need to understand these things and you need to have an opinion about how you want to measure your business, and then put yourself in a situation where you can actually measure it and test it and get better at it.
It sounds more complicated. It sounds
It is complicated.
It is complicated. Then you talked about, at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned like, that today you wouldn't recommend the data teams as you did a year ago or 2 years ago. But if I if I let's say that I become the CMO, I'm the chief marketing officer of a direct to consumer company.
Yeah.
Even if I have some analytics experience from my previous jobs, how would you approach doing what you're doing? Like not every CMO, not every marketer, it's a data scientist. Not every marketing knows about warehouses and Snowflake and Segment. Some might have some experience, but they don't have the technical background. They can ask the business questions, but then how do you that's why most people this is my hypothesis. This is why most people turn to Google Analytics, because it has been the standard platform for decades. And after you have Google Analytics, you may use an attribution platform to help you understand a little bit your how you allocate your marketing budgets and so on. But it seems to me somewhat complex if you're not Ryan Koonce
I think
doing
what you're touching on is actually an existential question that we have to deal with as a society, because fundamentally, if you are an executive today, you need to level up. You need to learn how to prompt. You need to think about AI, and your job is going to change. When I said don't hire a data team, it's not that you don't need a data team. It's that companies like Mammoth Growth have built AI that eliminates the need for a data team, period. Okay. I mean, we're seeing this vast improvement in capability and speed that is going to eat everything. I mean, it's not theoretical. It's happening. We're implementing it at companies. Entire data teams are being just put aside because you don't need that work anymore. It's just typey. So I do think it's complicated. I think one of the things that we've run into in these businesses, and it's going to be like a sore thumb if you're an executive and you need to get ahead of it, is you used to get away with buying Salesforce Marketing Cloud and not get fired. Well, now if you buy Salesforce Marketing Cloud, for sure you're going to get fired, right? You're just behind. And so, fundamentally, things are moving faster than they've ever moved. And you do have to have the data and you do have to have an opinion on the questions, but you also need to learn how to prompt. And you also need to learn how to ask for what you need in a way that provides, the AI with a way to get it to you. And so in the interim, you can talk to a consultant and they can make the AI do what you want and it can give it back to you. But we're not too far removed from a place where you can just ask it yourself. And so if you think about those armies of ICs that are running around not doing anything strategic, they also become irrelevant. As an executive, become even more irrelevant because you're strategic. But also, quite frankly, if you don't stay ahead, one of those directors is going to leapfrog you because they are thinking about these things. Okay. And so I think that that's a really, really important component to this, which is you need the data. You would need a data team if you're doing it the old way. You're probably going to hate them and they're probably going to hate you because marketing teams and data teams are like oil and water most of the time. But the reality is, as a marketer, what's even better is if you have friction with your data team, you can just go around them because you can plug the AI into the warehouse and do a bunch of things the data team would normally have to do. And you can do it yourself. And so I think that's where this inflection point happens. And I think it's something that, isn't going to happen in the next 3 months, but it's going to happen in the next 18 months. It's happening. And it's going to blindside most companies and it's going to blindside most executives just because they're not ready for it. They're stuck in the weeds and 2 steps behind.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ryan. Let me ask you a final question before we wrap up our conversation today. You touched on the need of leveling up our skills. So what advice would you give executives, CEOs, or let's talk about that CMO, how do you level up? Like what specific things do you recommend me and any other executive? Like, this is something that you must do. These are skills that you really need to develop right now, or you're not going to be able to stay ahead of the tsunami that it's, emerging right now. What specific actionable recommendations and tips and skills do you think that we do? Where would you focus your energy in short?
I think there's two things. And I'll give you a personal example. So the first thing is if you're not using ChatGPT or Anthropic every day, then you're already behind. There's
Yeah.
so many things that you do every day that you don't have to do anymore.
That,
If
I- that
you're
that that I'm doing. I'm doing
okay,
ChatGPT Pro, Claude, Perplexity, all, and I'm using it for for different use cases, and it's awesome. I'm
okay,
doing
well
that.
then
Yeah.
you're already ahead because most people aren't using it every day. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is think about what you would have an IC do and think about how much time it would take them and then try and do it yourself using an LLM. So I'll give you an example. I used a tool that plugs into an LLM this week, and I was working with a developer to build out a new application, and we're using AI to build the whole application. And I had been sort of doing it the old way where we were creating wireframes in Figma. And like, we started off with just a PRD and then it was like wireframes in Figma. And then it was like trying to tweak the Figma files and needing a designer and, all these things. And he's building the entire app with AI, no engineers. Right. And so he's challenged me to say, look, you're going too slow. You're actually the blocker here because you're doing it the old way. And he's like, you need to learn how to prompt in order to generate these wireframes in a way that's repeatable so we can rip through these pages a lot faster. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm great at this. It's like, shut up, I can do this. And I got in there and I started doing it and I realized there's a skill. I was like, oh, I have to build the context. Oh, okay. I understand that. I got to figure out how to write it so that it understands the context of the page and the brand and the things. It took me a little while to do, but once I did it, now it applies everywhere. It's like I taught my IC a thing that I don't
Yeah.
have to teach them anymore, right? And then
Yeah.
it was, okay, well, how do I make field widths and how do I make that? And then I was like, oh, okay, well, oh yeah, this is kind of what I want. Build me a page that's an onboarding flow that has these fields that does this on submit and da 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 da, and then make it look good. And what do you know? Boom! I'm like, wow. I mean, I might need a designer to tweak this, but like I'm 99% of the way there. Hey,
Yeah.
developer, go build this. And so I think that you know, I think that the key here is that now if I want to do that, I can sit down and do it in 30 minutes. And it would have taken a team like weeks, probably, by the time you write the brief and you get it to the right person and they do their part. And then the next person gets it into Jira and they do their part. We skipped all that. We went right to the answer. And we're doing that in writing emails. We're doing that in writing content. We're doing that in writing, product marketing. And so I guess I would challenge you to just do it every day and lean in, think strategically about what the goals are, and then apply it to, an implementation plan that doesn't require a team of people. And I don't actually think it's you as an executive doing it yourself, but I do think if you have a couple of direct reports that you're working with and mentoring to take that strategy and turn it into an execution plan on top of an LLM, you're going to go 10 times faster. And in the data world, the thing that we did at Mammoth Growth is literally we can do 5 weeks of work in 5 days now. It's incredible. And there's no reason every team and every company can't have that kind of success.
All right. Sounds good. Let me ask you the question about, we were talking about, Google Analytics and, attribution and blah, 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 all of those things that you are the CMO. I hear you about using LLMs, to, learn how to prompt, how to structure, get faster outputs, use the LLMs as if they were your ICs helping you to move faster. But I'm still struggling with how do you use LLMs to make sense of your marketing data to
Yeah.
be able to drive better decisions in terms of, oh, the last 6 months I've been investing $2 million in Google, $1 million in Meta, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
blah. I think that LLMs are, unless you connect your LLM or you have a custom
We're not
GPT,
there yet.
okay,
We're
we're
not
not
there
there
yet.
yet. Okay, okay.
No, we're not there yet. And that's okay. That it does. The point is, again, going back to the fundamentals of measuring marketing, it's auditability of data, which you get with a CDP.
Mm-hmm.
It's I have to be able to attach costs to users and accounts, which you get with something like Attribution App, and you have to be able to audit the models. And so if you get the data into the warehouse, you can either use a tool or you can use a data team to provide that data back to you. If you don't have costs, you can't tell the story. If you don't have auditability of data or good data feeds, which you don't get from Google Analytics, by the way, you can't see users and sessions and activities and bind them all together, then you're flying blind. And so it always comes back to that foundational, accurate, reliable, consistent, accessible data story, where it starts somewhere, probably lands in the warehouse, and gets, pulled together to provide answers to business questions that will allow you to move the needle on your business.
Yeah.
That's marketing, product sales, whatever.
Yeah. All right. Final question. What are your favorite tools, AI tools, LLMs, and what are the use cases that you are using it for the most?
We're using, favorite tools. So it's interesting. In December, the reasoning models came out, and that changed everything. So deep research and some of the reasoning models allow us to do things we couldn't do even 5 months ago. So I think that's the most important thing, which is my favorite tool today might not be my favorite tool tomorrow, and you have to have an infrastructure that allows you to plug into the newest LLM. So, for example, the first data engineering agentic AIs that we built were built on the original ChatGPT reasoning model. I don't know what they're on now. I think it was the last one we plugged into was Claude 3 something Sonnet. The Gemini 3.5 model sounds pretty good, from the team, and it's again changing really fast. So I think having that flexibility is a important component to that. And then, the specific tools that sit on top of the LLMs, honestly, I don't see a ton of differentiation. I think you have to try. I mean, again, there's new ones coming out all the time. One of the guys on my team likes RuCode, for coding, which is an open source, coding platform for the LLMs, lets us plug into the different models. I was trying a bunch of different apps for building these wireframes, over the last few days. And I haven't really honestly settled on one that I love, but also I'm using them to do different things. And I think that's the key here is that you have to be flexible and you have to be able to ask questions in a way where you can get the kind of output that you'd expect. And if you can do that, most of these tools are they're using Claude or OpenAI or Gemini anyway. And so, you can take that skill and apply it across the different systems.
If your 18-year-old son comes to you and says, "Hey, Ryan, I don't know what to do with my life. I'm going to college, I don't know what to study," what would be your advice?
Well, I'm like the pariah of Northern California because I think college is a waste of time. So, I'm probably not the best person to ask. The advice that I've given my 18-year-old son or 19, and also my 16-year-old daughter who's in high school is learn to prompt, buy a business, and just don't follow the path of the herd because all of the herd is going to go off the cliff over the next 2 years.
That's very interesting perspective. Ryan, it's been great to have you today. Thank you so much for dropping knowledge today, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I really appreciate it. And as always, it's been a true pleasure. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah. So thanks everybody else for watching and listening, and until the next time. Thank you so much.